Hello, my name is Grant Gittins, and this is for my Social Studies Honor Society Oral History. I am with my grandfather, whom I call Pop Pop in case that comes up, and we will be discussing his experiences during the Cold War. Could you start by stating your name and the year you were born in?
Tom Gittins. I was born in March 27th, 1940, many moons ago.
And could you just talk a little bit about your experiences during the Cold War?
Well, the main experience was when the Soviet Union broke up and became the Confederation of Independent States. The main experience that I had was as the CEO of a non-profit, non-government organization called Sister Cities International, which was linking U.S. cities, and still does, with other cities around the world for education, culture, business, technology, city issues, city matters. And in 1986, at the height of the Cold War, there were only 10 U.S. Soviet sister cities. By 1992, after the Soviet Union broke up, there were 94 U.S. cities that had sister city relationships with all of the former Soviet states. All now were different countries. In September of 1991, we had a U.S.-Soviet sister city conference in Cincinnati, Ohio. Cincinnati was the sister city, still is, of Kharkiv in Ukraine. But at that time, it was all part of the Soviet Union. And when the mayors from all the different cities got on the airplane to come to Cincinnati, they were coming as representatives of Soviet cities. When they landed in Cincinnati, they were now all of a sudden mayors of cities of different countries. The mayor of Tashkent, Uzbekistan, was now from Uzbekistan, not the Soviet Union. The mayor of Kharkiv in Ukraine was the mayor of Kharkiv in Ukraine, not the Soviet Union. And that's when things really changed dramatically for the relationships between the cities in the United States and the cities in the former Soviet Union, including Russia. Topic's very interesting today because yesterday I was at a forum in Washington which was sponsored by the Eurasia Center and called the U.S.-Russia Forum. And the reason for the forum, which is an annual thing, but the focus on the forum yesterday was whether or not now, given the relations between the United States and Russia, we are on the brink of a second Cold War, if you will. Not with the Soviet Union this time, but specifically in the thawing and the isolation of relations between the United States and Russia, most of which has to do with Ukraine, but it has to do with a lot of other issues that have become more critical between the United States and Russia. And so there was a lot of reference at this forum yesterday, which included, for example, people like Ambassador Jack Matlock, who was ambassador in the Soviet Union when there was the breakup and the end of the Cold War. The old evil empire, as President Reagan used to call it. And now the question is there a new evil empire? Is there a new freezing of relations between the United States and Russia? And is that now signaling the possibility of a new Cold War?
Could you speak to any of the effects that you noticed the Cold War was having in America, like in daily life?
During the Cold War period, I think the effects were a general misunderstanding between the Soviet Union and the United States, a fear of basically most American people feared the power of the Soviet Union. There was the nuclear threat, and one of the results of the ending of the Cold War was the agreements to disarm and to disarm nuclear weapons. And in fact, Ukraine as one of the current controversies, because Ukraine actually did dismantle and get rid of all their nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons. And there was an agreement that that would be recognized as part of the stability for the new sovereign country of Ukraine. And now that Russia has annexed Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, there are arguments that this violates that nuclear agreement. And what other chance is there for nuclear agreements with Iran and other countries, particularly Iran, if they won't be abided by? So that's a current result of the controversy of what they classify as the new Cold War. But I think during the Cold War and the Cold War period, there was just a lot of mistrust. As I said, President Reagan called Russia the evil empire. And it wasn't until President Gorbachev came along and into power in Russia, in the Soviet Union, that there was the opportunity to go beyond those threats. In the midst of all that, we did have a number of U.S. cities that wanted to, for example, and people in those cities, you asked about people who really wanted to strengthen the relationships, didn't believe that there should be this freezing of economic and social and cultural aspects of the relationship between the U.S. and those countries within the Soviet Union. So there was a lot of high interest at the local level throughout the United States in doing something and getting involved and having an opportunity for two-way dialogue rather than just fear. And in fact, prior to the 1991 conference I mentioned in Cincinnati, the first U.S.-Soviet conference, Sister City Conference, was in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, in 1989. And at that time, there were still only 10 U.S.-Soviet sister cities. But there were 90 other cities on that airplane that went to Tashkent, Moscow and Tashkent, that wanted to do something, wanted to crack the barrier of the Cold War, wanted to get rid of the animosity and the fear and the doubt that the Cold War raised.
Could you talk a little bit more about your role in the Sister Cities?
Well, Sister Cities is a national organization in the United States, a nonprofit organization. I was the CEO, the chief operating officer, so the head of the association. So my role was to manage the staff and to help expand the program, not only with Russia or the Soviet Union back then, but with countries throughout the world. When I started as CEO, there were a couple hundred total relationships with U.S. cities and cities around the world. And when I left, we had about 2,000 relationships between U.S. cities and cities all over the world, and a lot of expanding relationships, not only with the former Soviet Union, but after the Cold War, but with China, and particularly with China, Latin America, very strong, and now a very strong emphasis on relations between U.S. cities and cities in Africa, all over the African continent.
You mentioned the conference in Cincinnati when people came over from the Soviet Union and then it broke up.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about a little your thoughts when you heard the Soviet Union broke up and then the people in that conferences?
Yeah, everybody was shocked. And in fact, I mentioned Jack Matlock was the ambassador in Moscow during the breakup of the Soviet Union. When he came to Cincinnati, he came as the former ambassador. He was just leaving his post. And my understanding is that it was questionable whether the plane would take off from Moscow because of the fact that the Soviet Union was breaking up, and they had all the mayors gathered and from the different cities around the Soviet Union, but they weren't quite sure whether they now all could travel or even come to the United States under the circumstances. But there was a lot of political pressure and a lot of pressure from local governments around the former Soviet Union to go ahead with it. So the plane did take off from Moscow, and we had arranged for it to land. It was an Aeroflot. I don't know if you know, but Aeroflot was the largest airlines in the world during the Soviet Union period. When the Soviet Union broke up, Aeroflot also broke up into about 180 different airlines. Uzbek Air, Ukraine Air, and 180 different airlines were spun off of Aeroflot airline. That was one of the results of the breakup of the Soviet Union. But we arranged for Aeroflot to land directly in Cincinnati. Prior to that, Aeroflot had flights only to New York and Washington. But we arranged through the Air Force, American Air Force, to allow Aeroflot to fly directly into Cincinnati, which was a first, and made sure that they got everybody off the plane.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention, not just in terms of the Cold War, about experiences growing up or anything at all?
Growing up is too long for this tape.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your...
You bet.